What Jerome Powell shared in his latest conference yesterday shocked crypto market investors. And what's so interesting is that you really have to dig in order to get what he's saying. Otherwise, he's usually very clear. In other words, Jerome Powell is one of those guys, because he can move markets by accidentally saying something, has to be extremely cautious about what he shares, which is why when he does share something, it's so important, which is why crypto investors are starting to perk up at the idea that even Jerome Powell claimed there will be some loosening on crypto and banking regulations. But we'll listen to exactly what he shares in this video and what that means for your crypto bags. Now, just the other day, we'd been talking about how Ripple also agreed to acquire a prime broker Hidden Road for $1.25 billion in one of the largest deals in the digital assets space. And although this isn't new news per se, what is just today, Bloomberg even put out an article that Hidden Road received a new license, which is huge, to operate as a broker dealer in the firm's expansion, and we are going to be sharing what that means for XRP and Ripple's business model moving forward. So I find it really interesting the timing at which Ripple puts out this article just a few days before directly on their website to share the benefits and the reasons that institutions would want to use the RLUSD stablecoin, which is backed by institutional grade compliance, transparency, and trust. In other words, it's backed one-to-one in cash or cash equivalents. Now, all of this is going down while XRP yet again fails to break for new highs on some extremely bullish news. We had a double bottom right here with a higher low. We had a slightly higher high up to 225. Since then, we've been sold back off to $2.07 at the time of recording this video. And so it seems that 216 is a pretty strong resistance currently. But will this change? And if so, where will we go? How high will XRP climb? When will we break out to new highs? Well, stay tuned, because we're going to cover all of that in this video. And as always, if you're feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the Bullrunners YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDeFi, PAULIE. DEFI. And really quickly, before we dive into the statements that Jerome Powell made that definitely had an impact on the market and practically guarantees that stablecoins will now be used nationally and internationally and also be regulated, is a statement from Jerome Powell where he seems to be rather bullish. However, while we're all rather bullish, you should head on over to bullrunners.com/altcoin secrets to get our very free and very easy to read underground guidebook to becoming a crypto millionaire. We cannot guarantee those results, but at the end of the day, you're going to get 23 secrets to go ahead and hit your crypto goals, time your entries and exits, build a portfolio, pinpoint exact times and altcoins that you should get into before they explode, and the list goes on. All you have to do is enter your email right here when you click this button and you're good to go. And you can find that link in the description down below. Now, recently, Marty Party, who is a pretty well-known figure in the space, loved and hated. I feel like most figures that are polarizing typically tend to get more attention. He said Powell stated that we went through a wake of failures and frauds. During this time, we worked for a legal framework with Congress for stablecoins, which was not successful. So he's giving us a bit of history and background. By the way, we really need stablecoins to succeed. We need legislation, because then that opens up the corridors for companies like Ripple to integrate the RLUSD stablecoin, which is transparent, fully backed, one-to-one, has all the right licenses in place to operate under MiCA compliance guidelines in the EU. And now in the United States, this would be tremendous, because now you're really going to get into the whole asset tokenization of everything, and much of that will be done through stablecoins. This will bring in new liquidity flows into all sorts of cryptos. It will bring in new money and interest, and this is really going to come from a lot of those retirement accounts where you might have old folks or just people in general who don't know anything about crypto, don't invest in crypto, wouldn't ever show an interest, but now their fund managers are going to take money of theirs and then move it into asset tokenization spaces. And again, a a lot of that might find its way into crypto. So he continues and says, but what you see now is a congressional change, and we are close to a legal framework for stablecoins, which could have wide appeal, to which he said Jerome Powell is bullish on stablecoins. Still, this is one of those things where I always like to trust but verify, and the reality is in most social media circles, you really cannot trust. So ultimately, it all comes down to that last piece, which is verify. I like to remain optimistic. I like to see bullish news, but at the end of the day, you have to also be realistic. And so I like to go and find videos or find the statements that people make if someone just shares it online. And so that's exactly what we did here. Let's actually listen to what Jerome Powell said on stablecoins.
So we went through a wave of failures and fraud and things like that were the headlines for a couple of years. And I think what you see now is, and during that period, by the way, we worked with Congress to try to get a framework, a legal framework for stablecoins, which would have been a nice place to start. We were not successful. I think that the climate is changing, and you're moving into sort of more mainstreaming of that whole sector. So Congress is again looking at both the Senate and the House are looking at a legal framework for stablecoins. Depending on what's in it, that's a good idea. We need that. There isn't one now. And stablecoins are a digital product that could actually have fairly wide appeal and should contain consumer protections of the typical sorts and transparency. And that's what the Senate and the House are working on. So that's a positive thing. I also think some of the, we took a pretty conservative, and other bank regulators took an even more conservative perspective on the guidance and rules we imposed on banks. I think there'll be some loosening of that, and I think we'll try to do it in a way that preserves safety and soundness, but that permits and fosters appropriate innovation, but that does so in a way that again doesn't put consumers at risk in ways they don't understand or make banks less safe and sound.
And ultimately, that's all it comes down to, right? If you're chairman of the Fed, you are trying to make sure that the banking system remains intact. There are no major issues around bank runs, that ultimately countries, economies, and individuals have confidence and certainty that there's real value behind this almighty dollar, which is backed by essentially nothing other than the full faith of the US government, in this case, the Fed. But the reason I think he's actually excited about stablecoins is because they are starting to see that not only is it a very successful business model, but there's extreme demand, and that demand will continue to grow alongside asset tokenization of basically everything in the future. You're going to take the US dollar, put it on blockchain, which is basically a stablecoin, and then offer all sorts of unique assets and products far faster, far cheaper, far more efficient than everything else. So there's no room in this world where it doesn't make sense. He knows this. And what's really valuable about a stablecoin is that if it's going to be compliant and regulated, then it's likely going to always be one-to-one backed, at least for the short term or the interim, right? Until they start to get into fractional reserve stablecoins, which will continue to create demand for the US dollar. So ultimately, this is just like a branch on a very big tree called the dollar, and it has potential to be a very big branch. Why would I want to cut down the branches of my own tree? Ultimately, this is very beneficial for the dollar. I think Jerome Powell sees that. I think a lot of legislators see that. And now they probably all want a piece of the pie. And maybe that's why Ripple, or better yet, Brad Garlinghouse, hanging around Washington, D.C. often is starting to get the lowdown on what comes next, which is why they decided to buy the prime broker Hidden Road, and then put out this article on RLUSD, their stablecoin. Let's go ahead and click through, and you'll see that this is the direct article from the Ripple website on the stablecoin market. And so this is much of the information that we probably already know or have heard inside of XRP communities or YouTube channels. I think this article, though, is more for their institutional clients as stablecoins are adopted, because there are a lot of players out there that manage a lot of money that really don't pay attention to a lot of this crypto stuff because it is too volatile, because there's been a lot of scams, because sometimes it's just not liquid enough, so they don't take it seriously, right? But then they listen to Jerome Powell and say, whoa, what's going on? Stablecoins, how How would we use those? What's going on, right? And so this is really what that's for. And so this article does a good job of explaining how stablecoins are just better than everything else and why they should be used. And now combine that with their business model and prime broker, I really do believe it's game over. I think XRP is now one of those tokens that is not only here to stay, but will dominate the crypto market for years to come. In 2022 alone, fiat-backed stablecoins processed almost $7 trillion, which surpassed that of MasterCard and PayPal in transaction volume, which is insane. And unlike traditional fiat to fiat payments, stablecoins are direct and settle in real time. This instant settlement capability, combined with lower costs and fewer failed transactions, makes them an ideal asset to move value around the world. Now, here are all of the ways in which you can do that, right? We're not going to cover all of that right now. And so I like to see this type of proactivity inside of Ripple as they expand their business, because then they go and make the pitch. With Ripple payments and RLUSD, enterprises can confidently enlist stablecoins for cross-border payments, gaining access to scalable, secure, and compliance-focused solutions for the next era of global finance. And now with the SEC out of the way completely, things are looking really good. Here is a link that they share to explore ways your business can leverage stablecoins to scale and stay competitive in the crypto economy. You click through there and now you want a deal. And so ultimately the goal of that article is this, but where I get really excited is the fact that Hidden Road just received a FINRA approval for a broker-dealer license. Now, what this means is this: a broker-dealer is able to provide new and existing institutional clients with a full suite of regulatory compliant prime brokerage, clearing, and financing services in fixed income assets. And when we talk about fixed income, because it's typically very safe, we're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. Combine that with the RLUSD stablecoin, combine that with the fact that Jerome Powell is now talking about it and very bullish for stablecoins. And you have a recipe for success long term. Even if all cryptos didn't do too well, it's extremely likely RLUSD will, which will bring a lot of attention and money into the XRP ledger because they are integrating Hidden Road with the XRPL. You know, so often we hear so much news when it comes to XRP and we have our expectations so high and we look at all of this stuff and it's very hard to filter between what's actually important and what isn't. I would argue that this is probably one of the most important and pivotal pieces of news that I've heard all year, yet no one's really talking about it, which leads me to believe that we are actually in a good place to start accumulating, even if we continue to dump a little. Now, that's on the bull side, and I don't want to be a bear. I want to be realistic. I want to share my personal expectations, but I'm going to cover two pieces of news that are interesting to the other side. First and foremost, it's the fact that gold is trading like we are in a depression. Over the last 20 years, gold is now outperforming stocks up to 620% compared to a 580% in the S&P 500. Over the last 9 months, gold has officially surged by over $1,000 an ounce. And here's the chart. I could go ahead and look at the chart. We're going to trust that this post is legit. I do know that gold has hit up to upwards of $3,300 per ounce, which is absolutely insane. And typically when you see these types of rallies, it's because of global macroeconomic uncertainty. So while people are uncertain, again, guess what? Maybe buy when there's blood in the streets, buy when there's fear, buy when people really don't want to buy anymore. And again, I'm not saying you should go dump your whole bag in, maybe dollar cost average a little. So here is a post from Ki Young Ju, who is one of the co-founders of Crypto Quant. And as you can see here, he's sharing the fact that Bitcoin supply is greater than the demand. In other words, when this little 365 MA rolls over like we did right here, or like we did right here, not flat lines or goes up just barely, not like back here, right? Or even here, it's already rolled over, like peaking off. You can see that we've currently peaked off, which means the demand has rolled over for the total amount of the supply that is entering the space, which leads him to believe and be a bit more bearish. Combine that with the fact that gold is consistently climbing and the fact that we have such a weird environment when it comes to the bond market yields. Not only is there uncertainty, we can prepare for volatility, which means we might not be out of the woods just yet, and why we should pay close attention to what happens in in the market, but maybe have a bit of cash on the sidelines. So let's go ahead and look at the XRP chart really quickly. And I'm not going to take too long on this one because you know what? We've already done a lot of work into this chart, and not a ton has changed since the last time we've looked at it. What I will say is this. Right now, we seem to be in an intermediate term downtrend. And if I were to take this tool right here and drag it over, you can see that what used to be a pretty strong support, especially with a long wick and a few bear traps with some major volatility to the upside and back to the downside, we are now being resisted at that 225 to 215 range. We did have a pretty bullish pattern right here, right? With our major low, a higher low, another higher low, a technical higher high. But in the short term, or I would say in the intermediate term, we are still in a downtrend and have actually failed to break above this range, even with the Trump pump and bear trap. As you can see, this is our current downtrend. And so even if the price were to come up to, let's say, another 225 yet again or higher, I would like to see a break above this trend line and arguably a break above 245 to 260 in order to be really happy about the fact that we're actually in a new trending market. But as things stand, we're kind of struggling right here and we're seeing lower and lower volatility. And so typically I like to trade with the trend. The current predominant trend is down, which means we're likely to get new lower lows below this low at 160, unless of course we break up above the 230 to 260 range. And I'll watch the price action closely. That's not all going to happen in one day unless we get some major announcement, but we've had tons of major announcements and that has failed to really pump the price. Like I said, back here, the Trump pump, or right here, the XRP, or I should say Ripple news around the lawsuit, right? Brad Garlinghouse said it's officially over. And guess what? All it did was pumped it from 230 up to 260. So any other news, I highly doubt in this market environment is going to pump the price extremely hard in a single day. So we're not really missing out on much to simply sit around and watch and wait. Okay. And I think that's extremely important. Unless, of course, you want a dollar cost average, just buy a little bit every week. Don't look at the price. I think that's a really smart approach over the upcoming weeks and months because it's very much possible we could get another break below 160. I would say 168 to 161. To me, that's pretty much a no-brainer at this moment in time. And if it doesn't go there, I'll buy into a breakout. Guys, I have to be very agnostic because this market is far too dynamic. When we look at the volume, and let's go ahead and do that, you can see, and I'll go ahead and really make this big, we had quite a few dip buyers here, which means there are a lot of not only diamond hands, but dip buyers in these ranges right here. Let me go ahead and just toss this on. But since this point in time, volume has been declining, which leads me to believe in the next major volume breakout, it's likely going to be the downside. And we will see some interest right here, but I don't think this is enough to support it. From 168 to like $2, that makes sense, right? That was just below our major range of support, but now that we're below this range, leads me to believe we're likely going lower. So again, play it at your own risk. Either way, long term, I am still very bullish. We just need this uncertainty in market environment to change and evolve and to see a directional change in the trend. Until that point in time, if you want to develop your skill sets and get more knowledge, head on over to bullrunners.com/altcoin secrets. You can find the link in the description below to get our very free ebook. No questions asked. All you have to do is enter your email, and on the other side, you will get an email with the book. So I will see you in the next video, my friend. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.